Capitol Hoops. Today we are at Magruder High School with head coach Dan Harwood, continuing our series Beyond the X's and O's. Coach, we appreciate you letting us in here and look forward to getting to know you a little bit better.
All right, great to have you, Mark. Welcome to my closet / office, my home away from home. For the last, well, I haven't had this office the whole time. I think 25 out of my 28 years. So this is my sacred spot.
This is it. So, Coach, I want to get into your playing days, your coaching days, obviously, but let's start off with a little bit of background on yourself. Tell everyone where you're from, where you played high school and college ball, etc.
Well, I was born in Silver Spring, and then my dad was a plumber, and he was doing the Aspen Hill Shopping Center. And 1961, when I was 3.5 years old, so I told my mom, we're moving to the country. So we moved out to Aspen Hill, bought a house for $20,000. My mom wasn't working back in those days. My dad was making $8,000 as a union plumber, and all the schools were new, so I went going to Perry High School.
Robert E. Perry?
Yep, graduated there in '76. And, I grew up playing at St. Jude's, football and basketball, and when I went to Perry, it was good, but my senior year was bad. I broke my foot 3 times my senior year in high school, the same bone. Broke it a week before I was going to go to 5-star basketball camp in August. Devastated. Then I went to first game of the year. We played Sherwood, had a great game, pumped up. Next practice, I break the same bone. Devastation. Senior year, I worked so hard, got it back. Then I came back probably end of January, maybe, but it was never 100%. Played with a big padding in my foot. Played, okay, and I had some, Division III schools looking at me and stuff, but then in this late spring, I broke it again. So then they put a big cast on it for 2 months.
Yeah.
I wear inserts to this day, 41 years ago.
Really?
Ended up sitting out a year, getting my foot better, but it worked out well. I went to Montgomery College, and the year I sat out, I grew 2 inches.
Okay.
I went to Montgomery College, played for Don Drown, and then, my game really flourished there.
So were you a guard in high school?
Yeah, I was 6'2", a little bit of everything, more of a ball handling, where's my strength, the score. But I went to Montgomery College, played on some really good teams, and Butch Marshall, the coach at Damascus, was on my team. John Cooper was my summer league coach for many years, coach at Urbana, lifetime, still great friends with. Dennis Casey, played with Dennis, went on to play at Coastal Carolina. I had some offers after my first year at junior college, but you know what? They didn't have phys ed. I always wanted to be a college coach, but I knew if I wasn't a college coach, I was going to be a phys ed teacher. It was my favorite subject in school. So I remember Bentley offered me a full ride, but it was just all business school. So I said, no, I like junior college. It was fun, and I went back and then and had a great year. Scored a lot of points. And we had a good team, and it was fun. I loved playing for Don Drown. Really opened up my game. He was the first coach that told me, to shoot. You're good. And then
how did you guys do as a team?
Good. We were 21-9 my first year. I think 7. My first year when we had Dennis. Then we had 3 of us that were scorers. My second year, I think I averaged like 26 points.
Wow.
But we weren't as good. So we weren't as good. But we still won 17 or 18 games. And then I was fortunate enough to get, my buddy Pete Strickland knew Coach Pitino a little bit from 5-star, and I thought some different things were going on recruiting-wise, but I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship at Boston University. It was Coach Pitino's second year there at BU, and Coach is, he's a little 6 years older than me, so that was, so I played at BU for 2 years, which was great. I had a great experience. Me and Coach have always been close. My son was his manager out at Louisville. We've always been in touch. It's pretty sad what's going on the last few weeks with him.
Yeah, what's your take on all that?
It's college basketball is a tough business, as you know, Mark. It's tough business. That's cheating stuff. That stuff's been going on for years and years. It's with the top players. The top players for years have been getting stuff, and I don't think any coach in America knows what's going on. People can't stop it. He didn't know it. I'm sure he didn't know what's going on. And that stuff with there's no way any coach would do that. Now, should he have known? Well, who knows? But his problem was with with his background with the restaurant incident many years ago, and you kind of lose your credibility. But you know what? It's college basketball is a tough business, and hopefully some changes are going to come about it. But Coach Pitino was great for me. I met my wife up there.
Oh, really?
We celebrate our 35th anniversary.
Yeah.
Got 4 great kids. So Coach Pitino, he was awesome. He was awesome. So after BU was great. Played a little bit in Europe. Wasn't working out there. I really wanted to come back, get married, and start my coaching career. And I coached at Montgomery College, and then I became JV coach at Paint Branch. Worked for Hank Galata, which awesome coach. He's won over 400. I passed him in wins a few years ago. Hank was great. Hank was Morgan Wooten's assistant for 5 years in the 70s, back in the Adrian Dantley, Kenny Carr years. And Hank was just awesome. For 2 years I coached with Hank. And the 2 years I was there, Mark, with Cliff Warren, who's now coaching at UMass. Me and Cliff have always been close. He was, back then I was young. I could go play with those guys all the time. Russell Springman, who coached at Texas for many years with Rick Barnes and played at Salisbury. And Russell was coaching University of San Diego last year. Now he's a scout for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And Russell was on my first JV there. And, the late Walter Hardy was on our team, which is just one of the most tragic things that I've dealt with here in Montgomery County. And he passed away tragically, a little over a month ago. And that was, Walter was on that team. And, so I had great experience at Paint Branch coaching there with Hank. He just showed me how to run a program. Just first-class guy, organized, big DeMatha guy. So obviously you can't get better than Morgan. Yeah. And so I was there 2 years, and then I got the head job at Seneca Valley. Was there for 4 years. My last year there, Quince Orchard High School opened up, and I got surplus out of the phys ed department. And Magruder job opened up, and the principal, Jack Graham, said my coach will be in the building. So my coaching style,
appealing.
I had to be teaching there. Yeah. I had to be. You got it. For me, it's all about relationships with the kids. And if I'm going to push, I tend to push my kids a lot, and you got to have a relationship with them. So, been here. I came to Magruder in September 1990, and probably then, I still wanted to be a college coach, but I was fortunate. I remember when I was JV at Paint Branch, my 2 good friends, Mike Bray and Pete Strickland, were both at DeMatha. And we played rec league together. Pete's a lifelong friend, and Mike was a good friend also, but Pete and myself grew up together. And they were both assistant coaches at DeMatha. Mike was teaching history, Pete was teaching English, and they were making $8,000 a year. I was teaching elementary PE at Page Elementary School, home of Tracy Jackson and Cliff Warren. Teaching PE there, and I was making $14,000 a year. I'm like, holy, I'm teaching PE, and Pete and Mike would come over to Page. I could lower the baskets, and we'd play 2-on-2 and dunking the ball. Those guys couldn't dunk, I could, but we'd lower the baskets. So we all wanted to be college coaches, but I just really wanted to be a head coach as quick as I could. And then, but once I started having children, and Mike and Pete went to college. Mike was at DeMatha first, so he went to Duke, obviously, and then Pete went to VMI. And when I found out what they were doing, all the recruiting had to do, and I'd call up Mike or Pete, hey, did you see the Lakers against the Celtics? No. Mike said, I'm flying out to California to pick up Cherokee Parks and fly back with them. And I'd say, Pete, you guys sit around the office all day and talk hoops. He goes, Danny, we never do that. We might do that one day a year. It's all recruiting, staying on the kids academically. It's tough. So, and at the time I had 2 kids, and I think right around my first or second year here, I decided, you know what, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay a high school coach. And, then we had 2 more kids, and that's when I got my camp going. People say, why is your camp successful? Well, it kind of had to be. You have 4 kids, and you want to live near your school, so, here I still am, still enjoying it, what I'm doing, and I'm just very, very I've had some opportunities to go to college, but this is my place.
What about opportunities to go coach in the private sector? I'm sure that's, I don't know, come across your mind at some point.
Yeah, well, you know, I kind of tentatively took the good counsel job about, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. The job opened up when Tim McKenna left in, I don't know, August, and I told the principal, I can't leave now, but I'll take it the following year. And they hired an interim coach, and I was going to take it. You know what, within about a month or two later, like in October, my younger son Tim was upset. That was going, all he knew was Magruder.
Yeah.
And I couldn't sleep for about 3 nights in a row. And finally I woke up in the middle of the night in October, and I told my wife, I said, Rosemary, I'm not going. She was like, what are you talking about? I said, I'm not going to good counsel. I can't do it. You know, I can't do it, you know. And, you know, she went back to sleep. And so I drove down there and told Jack Graham the next day, the principal, I said, Jack, you know, I just can't do it. You know, I just can't do it. It's best for my family if I stay here. You know, I'll get a pension someday. I want to coach better players. And we all want to coach better players. I'd rather coach college players, I'd rather coach pro players. But I said, you know what, I just can't do it. You know, I'm good at what I do here. And Jack said, well, hey, he said, hey, Dan, you still can teach at Magruder and coach over here and coach in the WCAC. And I said, you know, I can't do that because if I'm all in, I'm a part of, if I'm going to coach a good counsel, just like GJ's over there now. GJ's all in there. He's teaching over there. He goes to the football games. You know, he knows all the teachers. I think that's what you have to do to be a successful high school coach, you know. And I said, no, I cannot I don't want to be a hired gun, just come over there and coach, even though I would like the challenge. But you know what? And I've had a few other opportunities here and there, but you know what? Now I'm almost 60. I'll be 60 in January. Hopefully I'll finish my career here, God willing.
How much time do you have left? How many years should we expect to see you roaming the sidelines at Magruder?
You don't think am I slipping, Mark? What do you
No,
think? Come on.
not at all. But, you know, at some point I'm sure you want to hang them up and do something
No,
else.
I don't think about that. I love what I'm doing. I love it. You know, I mean, you know, I love what I'm doing. You know, and I'm at the top of my game. You know, I think now at 59, I'm a lot better than I was when I was 49. A heck of a lot better when I was 39, and I don't even know what the hell I was doing when I was 29. So right now I'm, you know, dealing with kids, and it's a great challenge, and you know, I love it. You know, and the competition, I tell the kids, the competitive part, that's my engine. That's my fuel. That's what gets me going. Now there's a lot involved, as you know, in high school coaching, but what gives you that energy? You know, well, the competition is what drives me. You know, that's not the main part of the job, but that's the energy. And when I'm not enthusiastic for practice or enthusiastic for, you know, Tuesday through Friday we open our gym, you know, at 6:45. I said I don't do Mondays. Tuesday through Friday we'll have 8 to 10 kids come in. So we've done that the last 3 or 4 years, and you know, just to work on their shooting. You know, kids and not kids. We have kids on the team that come in. And you know, I've missed maybe 5 summer league games in my career. You know, I still enjoy it. You know, and I go see all my players play in college. I tell them I'll go at least once. You know, I love that. You know, it's just the whole part of the job for me is still fun. And a lot of coaches get out of it too because they're they're teaching. You know, like my buddy Paul Becchio, they're teaching 5 math classes a day, or they're teaching 5 English classes. You know, I'm a physical education teacher. I teach life skills with my kids. You know, I don't have the paperwork that some of those people do. So, I hope to go. You know, if I stay healthy, you know, heck, I'd love to be a head coach for 40 years. You know, this is my 32nd. But you know, life, you never know. But if I could go 8 more years, I'd be a happy camper.
Last season, you notched your 500th victory. That was a really cool kind of event before the game. There were lots of friends of yours who kind of gave audio statements. It was just a really cool event before that game. Talk about that night.
Well, it was kind of neat. You know, I mean, I'm not really big on the attention there because I never said anything about my 300th, 400th, but 500 was a pretty cool number. Yeah. Just got been around for a while, and you know, Mark, other than my 2 years at BU. I've been here my whole life, so I know I have a lot of friends that I played with, you know, and you know, Mike Bray and Pete Strickland and Neil Murphy, who was with DeMatha for 17 years with Morgan's assistant. I feel I'm as in touch with Morgan more than any other player that's not a DeMatha guy. You know, so Morgan sent a great video. I used to work his camp before I started my camp.
Came out tonight to honor a man who's dedicated his life to working with children, not only as a teacher and a coach, but as a mentor. We've had a major achievement here, a legendary achievement, and we're here to honor that achievement and honor the man that's responsible for that achievement. As all of you know, Coach Harwood has worked hard and long to reach 500 victories. And that's only a small part of what he's done. The many members of his family and friends who are here tonight to honor him know that his best work has been done with the young men that have played for him. The lawyers, the doctors, the teachers, the NBA coaches, and many who've gone through college because of Dan Harwood. He not only teaches basketball, he teaches life. Not only on the court, but in his classroom. It's been an honor for me to know him and work with him for 18 years. And if you've been around basketball, you know it doesn't get much better than Dan Harwood. So tonight, many of his friends who've known him for a lifetime have come to honor him here tonight. So with you, them, I share this honor with you. For Dan Harwood and 500 victories and many years of dedication to coaching and teaching. Dan, thank you. I'd like to introduce one of Dan's friends from many years, Pete Strickland, who has a few words, and he has to introduce some very important people in Dan's life. Most important person in Dan's life, who really is responsible for those 500 victories, Rosemary Harwood. So I'm going to turn it over to Pete now, who has some very special words to share and some very special people to introduce. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. On behalf of all of Dan and Rosemary's friends, so many of us that are here, I'm just going to introduce some audio clips. There are also video clips that you can have later, but right now for tonight, they're just audio clips. The first one is from the Wizards play-by-play announcer who's here tonight, Glenn Consor, who was also a teammate of Danny's and a classmate of Rosemary's at Boston University. Let's hear from Glenn Consor. Please listen.
Dan Harwood, congratulations, man. I don't know what else to tell you. I'm not surprised. I talk about this on the air all the time. I know I'm the best high school coach in America and the state of Maryland. And I really do believe that. I think that all the players that have played for you through the years have been very lucky. I've been very verbal about it. There's not a lot of great high school coaches out there. But some, you are the best. 500 wins is...
And from Dan's college coach, some of you know him as the coach of Louisville, Rick Pitino.
Hey, Dan, I can't tell you how happy I am for you. So proud of my position. That's unbelievable, man. You did a great minute. You did. I know you're a seventh coach, and I'm really proud to be one of them. Go get another 500.
You'll get 500 more, coach, he said, okay. And from the coach of the Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame, Rockville native himself, Mike Brett.
Coach Harwood, first of all, happy New Year and congratulations on 500 wins. Pat McLean, legend of Montgomery County. On a serious note, Danny, what a milestone. You touched a lot of lives back there in good old Rockville, Maryland. Meet you at the Second Gas Club. Take care.
And finally, from a worthy rival of Coach Harwood's, one of the two high school coaches in the National Basketball Hall of Fame, and an admirer of Coach Harwood, Mr. Morgan Wooten of DeMatha High School.
Dan, I want to congratulate you on 500 wins. What a magnificent accomplishment. Not done by many, but the most beautiful thing in the 500 wins are all those hundreds of lives that you touched as you coach these young men how to be not only great players, but to be the best human beings they can be. Coaches like you make the game great. And you're great, my friend. Congratulations on an awesome accomplishment.
And we have the videos for that too, Dan and Rosemary. And now I'll hand it off to Coach Tony Giles, who's been here for at least 499 of the 500 wins. On behalf of Coach Lincoln and Coach Palmer, let me hand off the microphone to Coach Giles.
And the coaching staff would like to thank you and honor you for your dedication to the kids, to the program, and not only this current coaching staff, but also we have some coaches that are here in the audience. We'd like to recognize those guys and thank them, and recognize also the fact that you got about 8 to 9 coaches throughout the county right now that are being coached here at Clayton. Right, so we want to give you this in commemoration this ball for 500 victories, all right, and also this crystal trophy. And it says Coach Dan Harwood, Magruder High School, in recognition of achieving the milestone of 500 career wins, December 21st, 2016. It also says, although I wanted my players to work to win, I tried to convince them they had always won when they had done their best. John Wood. Thank you. And one thing we always do is don't do anything alone. And Dan didn't really do this alone. He had the help of his lovely wife, Rosemary, wanted to present her new stuff. Let's play ball.
You know, it's just you know, it was fun. But if I win a 600, God willing, you know, we won't do it again. You know, we would wait till I retire or something. But it was fun.
Wait till you get to 1,000.
No, that's not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen. But it's, you know, it was fun. A lot of my friends came. You know, and like anything in life, if you can't share it with other people, you know, it's not that much fun. So you know, it was fun. You know.
Let's go through your career at Magruder. We don't need to go year by year, but maybe era by era, or let's just start off when you took the job over. Do you remember the first game you ever coached here?
Yeah, we beat. I don't know. No, I don't know. But I know my first team. I only had 3 seniors, and 2 of them were good players. Mike Graham and Jerome Williams. Jerome Williams was 6'3" then, the junkyard dog. He wasn't quite the junkyard dog yet. I suspended.
Yeah, what kind of player was he? Everyone knows he went to Montgomery College, grew a lot, went to Georgetown, played.
You know, he averaged 15 to 16 points and 9 rebounds, and wasn't a very good shooter, but he was a really good offensive rebounder. And
he had that like tenacity that he's kind of known for.
No, not as much. I suspended him 3 times the first year.
Yeah.
I'm establishing your program your first year. Your first year as a head coach is definitely the most important. You can't try to win games. You got to establish the program. And it was all Mickey Mouse reasons, being 30 seconds late for practice or not turning a form in time. So Jerome didn't talk to me for about a year and a half. He's like, his parents were great, and he wouldn't play really great defense. But I knew he was a nice kid. He was 17 years old. He didn't even turn 18 until November. So he went to Montgomery College, played for a friend of mine, Steve Hobson.
Yeah.
I went and saw him play. And now he was like 6'6". Oh, he's still as quick as he ever was. And I remember calling up 3 of my friends. Tommy McConnell was the head coach of T.J. McConnell for the Sixers. His uncle's a friend of mine, he was coaching St. Francis, PA. My good friend Bruce Kelly, who now coaches Bulls, was the assistant for Chris Nockey at American. And Pete Strickland, my best friend, was assistant coach for Oliver Purnell at Old Dominion. They all started recruiting him, and I started reaching out to Jerome again. You know, we kind of reconnected again, and you know, and I helped him out, and you know, we kind of developed our relationship back again. And you know, that's what I said. He was a 17-year-old kid, and I was starting my program, and then Jerome, you know, signed with American University, and then
Oh, really?
Yeah. Chris Nocky always kids around, he'd still be coaching if that had happened. But Jerome was 3 credits short from graduating from Montgomery College. So he couldn't qualify in the class that he needed. You know, they didn't offer it in the summer or something like that. And then, so then he was just taking his course at Montgomery College and planning on going to American the next year. And he was playing pickup ball down at Murray High School. And some people saw him, told Big John about him. And Georgetown came in and offered him a scholarship, and he played with, you know, Allen Iverson and Othello Harrington, and next thing you know, he's a first-round draft pick. We retires in Jersey. He comes back here, talks to all the kids, and talks to the whole school. So I'd like to thank Coach Harwood for teaching me how to be on time. Because in the NBA, they fine you. And we've been close ever since. He comes back and speaks in my camp when he's in the area. When he was at Georgetown, he'd come speak in my camp. And, you know, I can't say enough about him. He's just a great, you know, got his degree, got a beautiful wife, 3 kids. You know, he's just a fantastic guy. And my first years here were fun. Silas Chung was our leading scorer, you know, and he played at Mount St. Mary's, played overseas for a couple of years, and he's my boss now. He coached basketball. He was my JV coach 1 year, then he went and coached Urbana, then St. John's Catholic Prep, coach and AD. Now he's back in the county as my AD, you know, and
Comes full circle.
full circle. So he's my boss, which is awesome. You know, he's just a great, great person. And then, you know, and Dan Helly, the NFL Network, you know, he was on my second team. Mike Nisley is an NBA agent, Melo Trimble's agent. So it's fun with those guys. My first couple of years here, if I'll send a text about something, Mark, you know, about some game or something, you know, every few months or something, they'll immediately start having like 30 texts in a row, just giving each other a hard time. Jerome's in Vegas, Dan's in LA. You know, Mike Graham's in South Carolina, you know, Nisley and Silas are here. It's really, I really cherish those, my first year starting out our program. You know, and then, you know, we've had some great players here, and, you know, I've always told it took me to at least my 4th year to it was really my program, where all the kids, you know, they come up, knew the expectations, and, you know, I've had a lot of great players, and, you know, it's been a fun ride, and, you know, one of my best teams ever was my '94 team. We had a great team. We only had 1 loss, and it's the only game in my career I thought we got a short end of the stick with the referees. You know, at a county game, and you know that's why if you watched me coach,
That was a playoff game.
Yeah, regional championship game to go, and we lost to Thomas Johnson up there. And I don't know if we would have won or not, but that's why when you see me, I don't really get on the refs that much. I 1 or 2 a game. You know, I've lost a lot of games in my career, but only really 1 I thought because the refs had a hand in it. And that, you know, so. But that was a great team I had then, and then you know, we were short a few times here and there, but you know, had our breakthrough season in 2001, and when we had the miracle season when we went 27-0.
Was that the first regional championship you ever won?
Yeah, we had lost in a couple. We were pretty good in '99 and 2000, and you know, had a few shortcomings. Had to discipline a player and couldn't play in a playoff game, and fell just a little bit short. You know, a couple of years, but the 2001 team was just an awesome team, led by Isaiah Swan and Pele. Our tallest kid was 6'2". Not only were they great athletes, they were great kids who just had great chemistry. And, you know, when we played Eleanor Roosevelt in the championship game, I think at the time it was the largest crowd for a state championship. One whole side was Roosevelt. They had Delonte West and Eddie Baston. They had a great team.
That was the Glenn Farello team?
Yeah, and they were good, you know, and, you know, we probably beat them 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5, but that's the beauty of basketball. That night, it was our night, you know, we won a great game, and we ended up being 27-0, and that was the you know, just a great team, and just athletic kids that really enjoyed playing with each other.
That was your 11th year as a coach?
Well, we count, yeah, that would be my 11th year here.
So 11 years in, you win your first regional chip and your first state chip in the same year. How do you come back the following season with the target on your back? not only a defending state champ, but you guys were the #1 spot in the Washington Post as well.
Yeah. Well, it's fun. I tell the kids we enjoy the competition. That drives you. The competition drives me, and not all my players, but we love the competition. We want every game to be a big game. That's the beauty of high school, is we only play 22 games. So I do treat every game like a big game. Some coaches don't have that philosophy in it, but my game, our first game of the year, state championship. Now we want to be better in February, in March for the playoffs,
Right.
but our first game is state championship game. I missed games my senior year. I know what injuries can do. So if we play the first game of the year, and this year we're playing Wooten, at Wooten, it's state championship. I treat every game like that, because you go out there and you might have 20 points or a buzzer beater or the triple-double or whatever, that special dunk, and you might get hurt the next practice, and that's your memory. So yeah, we were pretty good before that. So we've, us in Springbrook, consistency probably the last 20 years or so have had some great battles, and even then when we're not super strong because of our history, we usually bring out the best of a lot of teams, which is good. We cherish that. We want that.
So when was your next regional championship after that?
We went down there. We
season?
went down there in 2002. The next year.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we went down there and we lost to Thomas Johnson in the semifinals. They had a great team, and then 2003 we went again, and we lost Billy Lanier's team, Oxon Hill, in the state championship in a great game. And then in 2004, I probably had one of my best teams ever. I had like all Division III players, but they could all pass and shoot. That's the year we beat DeMatha at DeMatha.
Okay.
That was Mike. I think that was Mike's first year.
That was the year in the Christmas tournament you beat
Yes,
them?
yeah,
Okay.
we beat them pretty handily. That was in 2003, 2004. We had a great team. That was probably my best chemistry.
Yeah.
I mean, we played in the Rock Summer League that year. We were good. We were good. We just had those kids. My older son was on that team as a role player, but they had played together at youth ball, kind of like Paul Foringer's team this year.
Yeah.
A lot of those kids has played together since 5th grade, and they just were really good. And we played in that summer league. I remember we beat Georgetown Prep when they had Hibbert and those all big. We just passed and shot so well.
Wow.
We had 6 college players on the team. Now Brandon Giles ended up playing at Longwood, but the other 5 were all D3 players. And we played Campbell, a Springbrook team, played, Flyer and Campbell in the championship, and we just had a bad shooting day and lost by 1.
That was what, the 4A West regional?
Yeah,
trip?
down at Blair, we lost by 1, and God, again, you never know in basketball. I thought we were better than them, but in one game, we just didn't shoot particularly well, and still only lost by 1. Because that year, it was Northwestern, who we lost. Jeff Green's team we'd lost in overtime at the Rock League, and then Woodlawn from Baltimore was in the Final Four. We beat them by 20 at the DeMatha tournament. Glenn Burney was there. We beat them the year before. So that's why high school basketball is good, just like the NCAA tournament is. I thought that was one of my best teams, and we didn't win it. I thought '94 was one of my best teams, and we didn't win it. So one game, anything can happen. So then we went back in 2007. I had Donald Robinson on my team and Alex Lee. Donald's playing in Czechoslovakia now, or Czech Republic. He's one of my top players ever, and we lost. And then had a little dry spell, I guess, as far as going down to Maryland. But then with JJ Epps, Nick Griffin, Garland Owens. We had a nice run. Went down there 3 years in a row.
Yeah, that was
fortunate. We won it, but like I was telling you earlier, like North Point went there 3 years in a row. Had 3 great teams. Roosevelt went there 3 years in a row, 3 great teams, and we went there 3 years in a row. We all won at once. So that was some good basketball.
So, Coach, you had that kind of magical run with the J.A. Epps, the Garland Owens, the Nick Griffins, the Justin Whitmers, those teams where, I remember I was doing Capitol Hoops at the time, and I came up here an awful lot, and the building here was just buzzing. It was just exactly. I remember I couldn't do my camera behind the basket where I do every game now because I would be in the way of people. Talk about that environment. Was Was that similar to the year that you guys went undefeated, the year you won your first state championship? Because that was just a crazy. The environment here was nuts for those few years.
Yeah, we've starting in about '92, we've had some really great crowds. I think Mark Thomas, Brendan Friesen's husband, did a special, and they said like Gonzaga and Magruder were the best places for home court advantage because of our crowds from like '92 to about 2000. And then it's. The last few years kind of fluctuated a little bit. Our enrollment's down. We're a 3A school now, and our makeup's a little different here at school. But you know what? For me, high school basketball and packed gyms, there's nothing better.
Yeah.
I don't care. Yeah, I don't care. I've coached at Comcast and Cole Fieldhouse. I've played in big places. A packed Magruder gym. When we played DeMatha that one year and we beat them here. Yeah, I don't care if there were 10 million people there or there was 1,200 people packed in a gym. Just great atmospheres. And and I remember Chris McGuthrie, who played at Springbrook in '92. That was kind of like the beginning of Magruder basketball. My second year here, we had a packed gym. It was Cashel night.
What night?
Cashel Elementary School night. So I had all these elementary school here, kids getting the people established in the program, and we're playing John Barrett's team, and we had beat them up. We had Chris McGuthrie and Darren McClinton both played at JMU, and Chris is the all-time leading scorer at Mount St. Mary's and played overseas for 10 years. And then Silas Chung, they all played at Mount St. Mary's together with Riley Inge from Paint Branch and Chris and Silas. So Chris would come back and work my camp. I got to know Chris a little bit, and he would just say, "Coach, we used to love the Magruder game, playing at Magruder. Even though we lost that one year because Silas had like 40 points and we beat him." And it was a great atmosphere. We started having music for starting lineups. We were the first school in the county to do that because they did the Bulls. We had the Bulls music. We do that at camp now still, but we had the starting lineups. And whenever I do retire, one of the things I would really miss would be those Friday night games against Paint Branch or QO or Sherwood, Springbrook, DeMatha. Those special games that on a Friday night. Those are they're not always fun to coach in, but the atmospheres are great. I imagine it's fun for our players to play in it.
You mentioned the DeMatha kind of rivalry. You guys had, what was it, about 4 years where you played them every year?
Well, we've played them 7 times in our life. Played against Morgan a couple times, and Mike Jones was nice enough to play us, and Mike would, and I always give Mike credit because he has a lot more to, lose than us. You're playing a public school, you should win. But I told them we were good, so they invited us to their Christmas tournament one year, and we beat them, and that was great, And that was Mike's first year, and he was just getting it rolling there. And then a few years later, when we had my really good team. I wanted to challenge our kids, and there's no better name than DeMatha. There's a lot of other great programs in the area. And so I told Mike, hey, we're going to be good, but we have to have a 2-year contract in the county. So we played them, and they beat us down their place, first game of the year. And we didn't lose any more after that. That's the year we won it. Then the next year they came out here, and we had a great, J.J. Epps was just unbelievable. And we beat them here in a great atmosphere. And then, I didn't want to play in the next 2 years because we weren't going to be as good. But Mike called me up and wanted to play us, and I said, you know what, we'll do that. I don't think we have much of a chance to beat Mike, but Mike was such a class guy and a good coach. And I knew we could compete. It wouldn't be a total blowout. But so we played them, 2 more times, and they beat us, and we had Joe Hoogley, so we were able to, hopefully make it worth their while. But we haven't played them since, and it's a little harder sometimes for the public schools to match up talent-wise. We really have to have those special kids that size-wise and special kids that really develop.
So I want to talk to you about, I think it was the second game in that 4-year span where you played DeMatha at the time that they came here. They had BJ Anya, who was 6'10", probably the longest arms in college basketball the last few years. And defensively, he was really the only kind of premier player they had on their team. I don't know how well you remember this, but you guys did such an amazing job defensively. You would front him, you would back him. Every time there was a pass into the post, it seemed like it was getting deflected or you were coming from the weak side and stealing the ball. Do you remember the game plan defending him going into that game?
Well, he killed us the year before. You know, when we played pretty well, but they were doing some high-low stuff,
Yeah.
and BJ had lost his weight, and he had a bunch of dunks on us. So he's coming into the game. He said, you know what? Just don't let BJ beat us. And so we had Brian Coleman, because we had lost Garland. We didn't have Garland that year. He graduated.
Right.
So we had Brian Coleman, about 6'3", just full front. Now, it's probably never, we three-quarter front at times, but I haven't done too many times we full court front. Full front. And we just, try to keep pressure on the ball and total front, and then get the backside help. And I can remember Matt Ricketts, my 5'8". My starting backcourt was JJ at 5'5", and Matt at 5'8". Matt must have had 3 steals coming from behind.
Yep.
Feeding the post is hard anyway. I don't care what it's just a hard part of the game. I wouldn't know too much because I don't have too many post players, but it's hard. And we just did a great job that game. And then when BJ got it, foul him. He wasn't a very good foul shooter, and he definitely missed some foul shots in that game, which really helped us also.
I want to go back to another thing we were talking about earlier. You mentioned you coached Jerome Williams, who made it to the NBA. How many Montgomery County players, since you've been here coaching in Montgomery County, can you think of who have played in the NBA?
Well, one of my friends who I played in the early stages of AAU ball with, Tracy Jackson, graduated in Paint Branch in '77. Tracy was all Met, scored 2,000 points in high school. 2,000. Started for 4 years for Paint Branch. They won the state championship one of those years. Over 1,000 rebounds. And Tracy played at Notre Dame on her Final Four team in '78. He was drafted by the Celtics, played about 2.5 years in the NBA.
Okay.
Steve Francis obviously played 1 year at Blair, in the big Dan Helly, Steve Francis matchup, which people still talk about today. Dan Helly hit a 3. We were an average team, and Dan hit that big 3 to beat Blair. They had a long winning streak. They were very good. With Kalor. Steve was only a sophomore then, but Steve had a good fourth quarter and had 12 points against us. But Dan hit the big 3, and that was a great win there. So Steve played in the pros, and then Lonnie Baxter, who spent some time at Springbrook, but had a great year at Richard Montgomery.
Yeah.
And then Jerome played 9 years in the NBA. From the public schools, I think that's it.
That's all I can think of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of, we've had a number of kids play overseas, and I've had a number of my kids play overseas professionally. But I think I've had 5 or 6 of my own, but not the NBA. It's just Jerome.
Yeah. So let's go to kind of the post JJ, Nick, Garland, Whitmer era. Those guys leave. You guys were definitely the talk of Montgomery County then. I remember the game when you ended Springbrook's crazy winning streak. Do you remember that game?
Yeah.
That was another incredible Magruder game that I came to. But those guys leave and kind of walk me through the Magruder basketball since then.
Well, it was, it's been a little up and down. That was they were just great kids and loved to play every time. And that's one of the challenges public school coaches have, is to get these kids to love hoops, I've been trying to do that for my 32 years as a head coach, try to get them excited about hoops. And, luckily we had a young kid came in named Joe Hoogley. He was like, when he was in 9th grade, he was like 6'3", 100 pounds. You could blow on him and he would fall over. He got hurt his freshman year because I guess someone bumped into him. And, then Joe played on the varsity. He played JV as a sophomore. Now he's probably up to about 140 pounds, but he's at 6'5".
When was it that he had like 3 threes in the game at Xfinity with all those?
Yes, his sophomore year, we moved him up to the varsity at the end of the year. And we're down there in a game, and Joe got in. Joe was a decent shooter and hit 3 threes as a sophomore.
Yeah.
And that was just great for him going into the off season to motivate him. And then Joe became just a fantastic player for me. One of my favorite kids of all time. He's probably come farther than any kid I've ever. It's hard to say good to Jerome, but Jerome had a great family environment. Joe didn't always have that. And my assistant Tony Giles has been with me for 20 years. Is just one of the most amazing men I've ever been proud to call my friend. Is just pretty all but adopted Joe, and Joe just took off. Joe's now playing at Central Connecticut State.
Yeah, he's had an interesting path the last few years.
Yeah, he went to Robert Morris, and he wasn't in the shape. But Joe's never been, he just trying to catch up conditioning wise. The coach up there has certain conditioning things to get. He never really kind of connected with the coach and didn't get it right away. So he didn't play that year. Went to Baltimore Community College. Played for Coach Munchko, who I knew pretty well. His son, Mike, played with my son at Salisbury, my younger son. So I knew Coach Munchko, great guy, and he did a great job with Joe. Joe graduated in there, and Joe's, he's got 3 more years to play at Central Connecticut, but he's already got his junior college degree. Can't wait to see him play up in Mount St. Mary's on January 6th. Bring the whole team up there.
Okay.
So Joe kind of carried us for 3 years. Just didn't have quite enough pieces go around them, but we certainly, we went to a couple regional championships and competed, and it's one of the challenges, one of the beauties of being a public school coach. It's different each year.
Yeah. So after Joe leaves, then I think Brian Bollert kind of becomes your de facto leader.
Yeah, Brian, well, I wouldn't say leader, but I say leading scorer.
Yeah,
Brian's a great kid. He's playing up Assumption now, full scholarship at a D2 school. He's either going to start there as a freshman or be 6th man. Brian kind of carried us. He averaged 18, 19 last year, and he was good. And we had some issues with a couple of our guards in years past, some discipline issues, and kids are kids. Sometimes kids are going to make mistakes, and the beauty of my job and most high school coaches, we can do the right thing for kids. There's no pressure to play kids when they do make mistakes, or our jobs generally aren't on the line. And we had some tough things happen to our teams, a couple of years, and that's part of coaching.
I think it's fair to say the Bollert family has really impacted Magruder basketball. You had two Bollert brothers, Bryant, and then his older brother, who I think was on your state championship team.
No, the year after.
The year after that. But the youngest brother, Patrick, has been a manager of your team for a long time. /
assistant coach.
There was a book written about his experience going through cancer. Talk about the relationship that you have with the Bollert family and with Patrick.
Well, Patrick's my man. When he started following us, he was in 5th grade, and someone told me, I think it was Justin Whitmer's parents told me he was a big fan of Magruder basketball. His older brother was on the JV then. So, we just, I threw him a T-shirt, started a relationship with him, and told my kids on my team about him, and told him his situation, and that's pretty much all I did. My team was great. All those guys, JJ, Nick, Garland, they would go over to his house. Garland would have a 5th Patrick throwing him alley-oops in his backyard, dunking the ball. Nick Griffin, shares like the same birthday as Patrick. Nick would go over there and knock on his door and leave him, Nike basketball socks. I just had some class kids, and Patrick was such a good kid, and that's a part of that team. He was in our locker room every day. Came in when he was able to, strong enough, come to practice. I'd give him a couple T-shirts. He'd have stains on them. They'd keep him on for 2 weeks straight. But it was great for Patrick, but it was just as good for our team to see the relationships that he had. And proud to say he's a junior now playing football. Will be my assistant coach again this year. He knows he might be able. He's a good shooter. He might be able to play hoops next year for us as a senior year. I'd love to be able to get him on the team. Just keeps things in perspective. Yeah. And I know he did a lot for we did a lot for him, but I think he did just as much for the kids in our team. And I think Garland and Nick, JJ, Justin, Brian, Matt, all those kids, Cameron Royster, Big Luke, I think they will always have a special place in their heart for Patrick, what he went through. And so, Patrick's always be a part of our program. And great family, Daniel and Brian. I can't wait to see Brian playing in college. And, it's going to be sad when Patrick graduates next year.
Yeah. The shot clock. This is something that a lot of people think has been a long time coming. Coaches like Paul Foringer are against the shot clock for, I think, obvious reasons. They exploited the fact that there was no shot clock, I think, to a T last year in that win versus Wise.
Yeah.
Give me your thoughts on the implementation of the shot clock this season.
Well, I'm glad we have it. This goes as basketball. We're the only people that high school boys basketball doesn't have it. Girls have it, international, college, pros. The pro game was going to fail until they came up with the 24-second shot clock. And then colleges, when I was a young kid, I'd see, one of my first games I ever saw, I wanted to be a coach, was with Lefty Driesell, coach in Maryland in '68 against the South Carolina team, and coached by Frank McGuire. In halftime, it was 4-3. Because people were holding the ball. Dean Smith would do 4 corners the whole game, a couple games. And they were on TV, and it was just awful basketball. So they put the shot clock in college basketball, and they put the 3-point line in, and we get. So I think it's just an evolution of the game. I think it's a better game. We're going with 35. Been a proponent for it for a while. 35 seconds. We were thinking about going 30, but since at first we're going to do 35, it could change to 30 down the road. I'm excited about it, especially at the end of the games, because too many games come in to, I think, become foul shooting contests. Now when you're up 4, 5, 6 points and there's a minute and a half to go, a lot of coaches will say, hey, we're not shooting or nothing but a layup. And, that's not the game. That's not the game. And not that foul shots aren't a big part of the game, but now if I'm down 4 or 5 points to Quince Orchard, and there's a minute and a half, hey guys, let's get a stop. Offensively, I don't think too many teams stall too much. Very few in my career.
How many times in your career have you been a part of a game where a team has gone to like 4 corners for an entire quarter?
Well, most of BCC in 1994 we were undefeated, and we beat them pretty bad the year before, and they came out and kind of held the ball, and we finally got a lead, but we were so worn out from chasing them around, and I kept pressing them because I was a young coach, didn't know what I was doing, and they ended up winning the game because we were just so fatigued and missed every foul shot. That's the only time I can remember more than a couple possessions here or there.
Really?
But I'm really excited about the end of the game situations. I think it's going to be a lot more exciting, and you know what, stalling is not hey, that's a problem in women's lacrosse. They're putting these clocks in, and they're saying with a lot of sports, you want to play defense, but you want to see some action.
You're a basketball lifer, I think it's fair to say. But do you need to pay special attention to anything regarding the shot clock? Will you need to do any studying, talk to any college coaches, or do you think you're just super well prepared for different strategic things that have to do with the shot clock?
Well, that's interesting. I've been talking to a lot of my friends in coaching, and I hear a lot of different things. And you know what? We're just going to try to figure it out as we go along. I don't think it's going to be a problem for us offensively. We might put in a call or two when the shot clock gets down. But I really going to think it's a lot of, it's going to be a lot of give and take this year. I didn't want to go into it and just have a million ideas what I want to do, because it's new to us. I've never really coached with a shot clock, so I'm no expert. So I said, you know what? We'll kind of figure it out as we go along. I said, offensively, I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference for us the way we play. So, ask me at the end of the season, maybe I'll have some better answers for you. But we just got to kind of, one of my favorite coaches, Gino Aram, always tells his players, hey, go figure it out. We're going to have to kind of figure it out.
AAU basketball. What are your thoughts on AAU basketball?
I think overall it's good. But it's just like everything else. There's really good programs, really good coaches, really good competition. Then there's also some bad competition and bad coaches. And I've had kids over the years that coach, I played AAU. Well, okay, that's great, but that doesn't mean you're a player. And I used to have kids would tell me, Coach, I played in 60 games, this month. And I said, well, I used to play 60 a week, but they were all in the playgrounds. It's a different era now. Where I grew up, was, going to Sligo, Creek Parkway, and different places around the county, and you played all the time, and you played pickup. I personally think that was a better era, but you know what, nowadays, kids just aren't, there's not as many playgrounds. It's just a different era, so you almost have to play AAU so you can get the game experience in. I got a million games. I didn't play organized basketball in 5th grade. I never played, I played a couple summer league games. I played one AAU tournament with Tracy Jackson when I graduated. I played 3 games or something. So, but I knew how to play, and I knew how to compete, and I knew how to win, because we just played in the playgrounds. The playgrounds don't exist very much now. Yeah. And so I think AAU is really important, so the kids are playing. the kids are playing. So now the high level AAU is great for the exposure, but it's good for the most part. But there's also things that some of the low level stuff that these kids sometimes. I've had kids over the years say, "Coach, we were in Memphis for 5 days. How many games you play?" I played 5 games, Coach. How many shots you get up? Well, I think I averaged 7 points, and I got up 10 shots each day. Well, you know what? That's okay, but you could have been home here for 5 days and got 500 shots up a day.
Yeah.
So you got to see what level you're at. The high level, where Nick Griffin played on Takeover and Joe Hoogley, and that level, it's pretty good basketball. But some of the lower AAU, I see highlight tapes, and there's just very little defense playing at the lower levels of AAU.
I want to talk to Dan Harwood, the Montgomery County basketball historian now. I'm going to throw out some superlatives, and
Okay.
I want you to chime in. Best shooter or shooters you've seen ever in Montgomery County?
Well, the first one is Ed Peterson. He taught me how to shoot. Ed played at South Carolina, then later Georgia. Played at Springbrook in 1970. He was the legendary shooter, and Buzzy Bremen followed him at Springbrook in '73. Was a great shooter, and then my JV assistant coach, who's working for me now, Brian Maggot. Brian led Blair to the state championship in 1975. Played for Maryland for 2 years. Left, he had a great team. Then Brian transferred to GW. So, anyone that's, over 45 years old or 50 definitely will know Ed Peterson and Brian Maggot. Since then, Nick Griffin's very good. My kid Ryan Junkins, who played for me on that 2004 team, he led the nation in free throw shooting percentage. Was 119 for 124. He shot
At Magruder?
at Hood College.
Oh,
at Hood,
collegiately.
Division III.
Wow.
He shot 49% from the three-point line year at high school. Has all the records up at Hood. Antwone Wills at Kennedy was a great shooter.
Yeah.
But I still. Brian and Ed, and Buzzy, they didn't have the three-point shot back then. They averaged 27, 28, 26. You don't really see too many kids averaging that many points nowadays.
Besides yourself, best coach you've ever coached, or just the best coach you've ever coached against in Montgomery County?
In Montgomery County, well, I always saw Hank, like that guy I worked with, Hank Galata. I couldn't beat him for a number of years at Paint Branch. Hank was very, very good. I worked for him. John Barrett at Springbrook and Bob Salento were excellent coaches, both at Springbrook. I'm thinking back when I was younger, starting out.
Yeah.
Paul Foranger's always done. He's done his own thing with his players. They're always tough to beat. Paul's great at what he does. Billy Wright at BCC, was an excellent coach. So when I came up, when I was a young guy, when I got a job at Seneca, I was 28. I really didn't know what I was doing. I thought I did, but I didn't. I learned a lot of hard lessons from going against a lot of great coaches.
Best rebounder you've ever gone against in Montgomery County?
Oh, geez. Rebounders. There's a lot of those good ones. Springbrook's has so many good athletes down there with the big kids. It'd be hard to talk which one of them, but they've had a number of kids that were just fantastic rebounders.
Yeah.
And
Demetric Austin.
he was very good. Just so strong.
Yeah.
They're so strong, and that's some of the rebounders, just are persistent. He was one of the better ones.
Best ball handler.
JJ's the best ball handler. He's one of the best point guards ever in Montgomery County.
Yeah.
But he was excellent. But there's been a lot in Montgomery County, a lot of point guards. I'm trying to think who would stick out. Right now I've seen us so focused on my players, but Springbrook's had some really Ridges. He was
Treon Ridges.
He had all the moves. He was very good.
Yeah. How about the most clutch player? Someone that you would not want to have the ball in their hand with 30 seconds left and the shot clock off.
In Montgomery County, it was probably Campbell from Springbrook. Shaq. He played at George Mason. He was tough. He was just, he could score inside and outside, and he was a good passer too. So he was tough. He was very good.
Last one. Best player you've ever coached against?
Coached against, it's, I'm trying to think, who was a great high school player? It was Dwayne Simpkins at the Matha. We played him in '92 up here. I thought he was just a fantastic point guard. I remember I just liking his whole game. I thought he was just, very, very good. Delonte West, we played in the state championship 2001. He had a great pro career. He might one-on-one player. He might be the best one-on-one player. I thought Simpkins was just a great point guard.
I'll tell you who I think is the best player I've ever seen in Montgomery County. Is someone you mentioned a few minutes ago, is Antwone Wills. I remember when I was in high school. I mean, he just seemed like he was destined for the NBA. But I was young then. But he was a good one.
Yeah, he was. I remember him more as a great shooter. He was a good player too, but he could really fill. And he had like unlimited range.
Yeah. How about the best dunker? Would you say it's Garland?
Garland would be up there. Tracy Turner, who played in Gatesburg, graduated in '89. He was awesome. And then him and Garland Owens, I think, are the two best. And then Garland, who played for me, was in the national dunk contest. And, kind of a YouTube sensation. And Garland was great because he really couldn't dunk in 9th grade, and he was more of a football player. And he surprised us some. Isaiah Swan, he had some great dunks in high school too, but he was only like 6'1".
I think Matt Bullock at Springbrook is going to join this conversation if we have it again next year.
He's fantastic.
Yeah, Coach, your family is, I think they're basketball people as well. At least from what I know of them, I know one of your sons is a very successful referee who's on kind of the threshold doing big things.
Yep.
Another son of yours was an assistant coach or still is an assistant coach?
He's my JV coach, yeah.
Talk to me about your family and their kind of roles in the basketball world.
Well, it's obviously, in coaching, since we use crazy hours in the season, you got to have a supportive family. So I met my wife Rosemary in college. We've been married 35 years, and she knows basketball is important to me. So if the word basketball is in there, I'm pretty good to go. If I said I want to go meet Mark and talk about football, what are you doing? Or if I want to go, have a drink, no, what are you doing? But if I want to go talk okay, go. Basketball has always been a big part of my life. And, my wife's super supportive because she met me in college when I was playing for Coach Patino. And, I was pretty busy. And, one of the greatest things in my life was my rec league career. I didn't want to go. I love my rec league. My rec league team was together for 20 years. And when I got my first head job at Seneca Valley at 28, I write this in the book I'm writing. None of my friends said congratulations. They just said, we got a gym. We got a gym. So we've played once a week, from ages 28 to 5. My knees messed up and everything, till about 5 years ago. And so I always had that one night a week, even during the season, up until I always played in rec leagues and had my own leagues. And because she knew that once a week I need to go out and play ball. And as we got older and we couldn't play anymore, it was more of a social thing. But, you got to have a supportive wife. And I love that. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to stay. I love being a high school coach because I can still play ball once a week. Mm-hmm. And in my family, I've always lived right where near I coach. I've heard a lot of coaches over the years say, they give up coaching because of their family or their kids are playing sports now. And I want to see their games. Well, when I coached at Seneca, I lived 3 miles from Seneca. When I first got the job at Magruder, I lived 6 miles from Magruder. 18 years ago, I moved. I lived 3 miles from Magruder. My kids lived in this gym. I'd go home and get them, bring them back for practice. When my kids were school-age kids, I paid money and rented our back gym out so they could have practice in that back gym. So after my practice, I could either help them coach or watch them. So I made it work. Yes, and so, and that's one that, my buddies that are college coaches, I remember Pete telling me one year he spent over 100 nights a year in a hotel. You know what? I don't spend any nights in a hotel unless I'm with I never did. We're rarely on vacation or something. I was around, and both my sons played for me here. My daughter, one of them played basketball, both of them played field hockey, and I saw all their games. My daughters played in college at Catholic U in Gettysburg. I saw all their games, or most of their games. Patrick was a manager at Louisville, my older son. You know, I'd go out there once or twice a year, see practice, see Coach Patino. He had a great experience out there. And
He went to Louisville?
yeah, he was a manager out there for 4 years.
Wow.
Got to travel the world,
Wow.
live nice, and then you know, and then when Tim was playing at Salisbury, I'm in charge of the practice schedule. I always have been for 28 years. I make up the schedule. So if there is, when Tim would have a game on a Wednesday night at Salisbury at 7:30, I'd practice 2:30 to 4:30. At 4:31, I'm in my car, and I would walk in that gym at exactly 7:30 because there'd be traffic getting down there.
Yeah.
See him after the game, get back home at midnight. I miss those days. It was fun seeing my kids play. And so, you know, being a high school coach and being I don't recruit, you know, now I could because I have time. But back when I had 4 children, I still could coach at a pretty good level. We never practiced Sundays. I've never worked a Sunday in my life other than getting ready for camp 6 Sundays a year. You know, we practice 2 hours a day on Saturday. Most of our games aren't on Saturdays unless it's a makeup.
Yeah.
So coaching at the public school and living close by has allowed me to, my family is the most important thing to me. And my son Tim now is teaching in the county, phys ed and health at Newport Mill Middle School, and he coaches JV basketball and baseball here. Works my camp. My older son Patrick, he's nuts. He wants to be a referee. I can't figure that one out.
Yeah, he's where's he reffing right now?
He's the second youngest referee in the ACC now. He's in the ACC, Atlantic 10, Colonial, Big South, Southern.
How did he get into that?
Well, you know, he's been in the minor leagues for a number of years, and he went to camps. Started with one of my neighbors, Joe Marissy, who's been in charge of Board 12 for the last 35, 40 years, and he started doing it in his senior year in high school. Didn't want to be a coach, not as mean and tough like his dad. He's just a nice kid, so he's just pursued that. Started off doing high school and junior high, then JV, then varsity, and then small college, and he's still doing some Division II and Division III, but I think he's up to half his games now are Division I. He's had some other jobs to make a living, and hopefully in the next couple of years he'll be full-time Division I ref. I'm looking forward to his first game this year. He's got a couple exhibition games, but his first regular season game is down at UVA on November 10th. So I'll go down and see that. Then the next day I'll go see St. Peter's, Nick Griffin play at LaSalle at 3 o'clock. Then the next day, Sunday, Joe Hughley, Central Connecticut State, plays at Rutgers at 2:30. So I'm trying to get those 3 games in before our season starts to see Patrick ref, and Nick play and Joe play. But he's got a passion for it. He watches more film. I don't watch much film anyway, but he watches film. Goes to clinics, goes to camps, and he's got a passion for it. And all you want is your children to have a passion for something. And he's got a passion for refereeing. Why? I don't know. It's a tough job. It's a tough job. But family, with whatever little success we've had here, it's been magnified because of my children and my wife are all part of it.
Are you an NBA fan?
Yes, I'm a basketball fan. I like everything.
What do you think of the NBA game? It's so much different than high school and college.
Yes, it is different, but there's some great basketball. My college roommate's Brett Brown, who coaches the Sixers. I roomed with Brett for 2 years, and it's hard game. It's a different game, but there's some great basketball players. Now I don't sit there and watch too much of the whole game. Listen, I love the Spurs, I love the Warriors, and then the Sixers and the Wizards. So I follow those teams. But I do enjoy it. I mean, I'm not a big play guy, but the best plays, the best sideline out of bounds plays, all that stuff is in the NBA. The NBA coaches are great at that.
Let's talk about you as a coach a little bit. The 3-point line is something that I feel like Magruder is always a good 3-point shooting team. You've had some prolific shooters throughout the years.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about that from, I don't know, a strategy point of view or just a coach's point of view.
Yeah, it's a big part of our offense, and it started actually it started before my second year. It came in my second year of my head coach, so it started 31 years ago.
The 3-point line was influenced
Yes,
that.
and in the high school, it was the 87-88 season. That was my second year as a head coach at Seneca. And, You know, I remember I was playing our rec league team with Mike Bray and Pete Strickland, Dave Malkin, and Bill Rubeck. We were all 25 years old, 26. We go down to Ocean City for the state tournament, rec tournament, and they had the 3-point line. And I still can remember, I'm JV coach at Paint Branch, Mike and Pete are coaching at the Matha. Okay, guys, first time we're ever playing a 3-point line. Let's just ignore it and play our game. First time down the court, Pete jacks up a 25-footer. Mike comes down, jacks up a 20-footer. Pete jacks up another 3-pointer. First time in my life, I touch the ball. I'm like it's 17 feet away. I back up 3 steps, shoot like an air ball. We're down like 10-0. We have a timeout. Our big guys are saying, I thought we were going to ignore the 3-point line. Yeah, you know. And that was our introduction to it. And then, you know, Patino took that team to the Final Four, you know, with Billy Donovan. Using the 3-point line. They weren't that good. You know, Billy was great, turned into a great player. That was one of Coach Patino's greatest coaching jobs. And in 1988, you're probably, were you born in, Mark?
Yeah, I was born in 80. Come on.
Yeah, 88 team, the Olympic team, John Thompson went over to and we lost in the Olympics in Korea, I believe it was. And we only really had Dan Marley as a shooter, and we lost to the Russians. The Russians would drive in. It was the first time the 3-point line in the Olympics, and they would kick it out, Sharunas Marcelonis, and they beat us. America got pissed off. No one beats us in basketball. So what happened? We got the dream team. Yeah, that's when Michael Jordan and Johnson and Larry and you know, Barkley and Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullin. No, America's not taking this. Went to 3-point line. So then I played in rec league, and I was more of a slasher driver type when I played. I was more of a ball handler. And when guys would penetrate in and kick it out to me, I was a better shooter in my 20s and 30s than I was as a high schooler. I was a decent shooter, but you know, I was always driving to the basket and trying to get a better shot. And I realized, you know what? It's not a difficult shot. And then it spread the floor. And so at a public school, you're not always going to have the most talent. And to try to, you know, one of my favorite things about Morgan Wooten is, you know, I'm not worried about beating a weaker teams. How can you beat the best teams in your league? And well, I said, you know, I started there. My second year at Seneca, we're gonna get to use the 3-point line. It's not that difficult a shot. And I've seen kids over the years. I've had kids in my career that I tell them, hey, you're not a very good player. But I tell you what, if you can hit this 3-point shot, we'll have a spot for you. And like Steve Kerr was like that for the Bulls. And John Paxson, when Jordan played, they always said that guy could stretch the floor. Yeah, so I think the 3-point shot, you know, it's like there's kids that can play a role. It's brought back some kids that maybe aren't super athletic, you know, that aren't maybe you know, great ball handlers, you know, but they can shoot. And shooting is a skill that you can get better at. I used to tell Nick Griffin, when Nick Griffin came in here as a 9th grader, and I knew Nick from camp, you know, Nick, not the most athletic kid in the world, he couldn't dunk the ball. I don't even know if he still can now, a senior in college. He could touch the net, and his shot was a little across his body. But I said, Nick, you know, you work on your shot. You know, you can be a scholarship player because you're a great kid, great student, great work ethic. He went out there and made 0 3-pointers his freshman year. And in the next 3 years made 225. You know, but he would practice every day. You know, I'd come in the gym sometimes, his girlfriend would be rebounding for him. You know, he practiced every day. And I always tell the kids, okay, if you make 1 out of 5 threes, you're getting the coach fired or you're sitting on the bench. You're a Gumby guy, you're just, you know, you're sitting, that's what you're doing. If you make 2 out of 5, you're a celebrity. You're a celebrity. What's the difference between 1 out of 5 and 2 out of 5? About 300 a day, maybe 400. You know, so, you know, but luckily I've been blessed here with a lot of great shooters, and my job is just make sure if you can make the shot, I'll make the guys pass you the ball. You know, so three-point shots it's been exciting for basketball, and it's changed the game. You know, there's I haven't had that many post players, and you know, our inside game is driving to the hoop. You know, I've had a couple post players, not many, but I just think it's spread the floor. You know, some people say basketball is better 4-on-4, you know, because it was just getting too congested. But the 3-point line has opened it up.
How have you evolved as a coach in your career?
It's a neat thing. You get better. That's the beauty of coaching. You get better every year. You go to college practices. We do clinics all the time. We're always learning from my peers. It's awesome. But the number one thing where you say, what am I a lot better at now, is this relationship with kids. Knowing what buttons to push, when to listen to them. Every kid's got issues. Every kid's got a story. And I get kids here at Magruder from every different background. We have kids that live in $1 million plus houses, and we have kids in subsidized apartments. We have everything. And so when you coach a long time, and I didn't get into coaching to make a difference in kids' lives. Every coach says it. I liked hoops. I want to be a college coach. I want to keep playing hoops. If I can't play in the NBA, I might as well try to coach.
Yeah.
But then the more you coach, then I have my own children, and then you hear, parents would tell me, you're making a difference. Johnny talks about you. I'm like, really? Come on. I'm just I'm not a role model. I didn't get into coaching to make a difference in kids' lives. I like hoops. Let's go. I used to play ball with the kids at the playgrounds and stuff. But then, probably, once I had my children, and by the time by my second, third year here at Magruder, I think it was 92 or 93, I started teaching life skills in my PE classes. I had all ninth grade classes, and it was teaching them how to be a ninth grader, how to study habits, how to avoid alcohol, how to ask for help, how to stay away from drugs, goal setting, all those kind of good things. I didn't want to be just a phys ed teacher, and I pride myself on it. I never sit down in class. I teach every day, and 3 to 5 days a week we teach life skills. And I'm fortunate to have a lot of my players in my classes, and sometimes I'd give speeches because my sons would be in my classes. They wouldn't want to hear from me at home. Dad, we know we're not supposed to drive when we drink, stuff like that. I said, no, when I had 30 people in class, they had to listen to my stories. So I think as a coach, what I've grown the most is just relationships with players, when to push them, how much you can challenge them, and that's a big challenge. Some of these kids have big goals, and that you want kids to reach for the moon, but you also got to be a little realistic. But one of the joys I get out of coaching is definitely seeing the kids go on and be successful. And when you're around at a place as long as I have, we have guys in their 40s, mid 40s, and not that I stay in touch with all of them, but a lot of them I do. And we have 3 doctors, many lawyers, coaches, accountants, professional basketball players. That's kind of, I would say, so I've grown the most, and it helps being a parent. And having my kids are all adults now, between 24 and 31. But when they were, I raised 4 teenagers. That made me a better coach. Made me a better coach. So that's when people say like, yeah, when are you gonna retire? I'm like, what? I think I'm actually I kind of know what I'm doing now. So it's I enjoy that part. Where when I first started coaching, not that I didn't like the players, but I liked hoops.
Gotcha. So from time to time, I've noticed that you lose it on the sidelines. I mean, a call will be made, and you will just lose it. What is that? Is that like a calculated thing?
No, it's just a problem I have.
Do you have like anger issues?
Yeah, I'm too competitive. It's usually not a call. It's usually something with one of my players, But and people, I'm getting a little better at it. But I don't know. Luckily, my son Tim is not like me. He's living at home now, saving his money, and my wife says he's cute like Brad Stevens, and why can't I be more like Tim? So my 25-year-old son's my role model. But when people see me yell at a kid, it's like, hey, those kids know me.
Yeah.
That's why I see them every day.
Yeah.
I am 98.9% positive with those kids. So yes, when I'm open, I want the ball. You better play. I hold them accountable. They're a lot of these kids aren't held accountable and everything. And what? We're gonna take good shots. We're gonna play defense. My main job as a coach, not to talk a lot of philosophy, but is make sure they don't get pissed off at each other. So when I yell at a kid, I'm not really yelling at them, but I don't let the players yell at them. So we want to play together. And when basketball is played together, Mark, as you know, it's a beautiful, unbelievable game.
Yeah.
When you get 1 or 2 kids that don't buy in, who would want to play basketball? It's awful.
Yeah.
It's an awful sport. And teaching kids what's a good shot and what's a bad shot, teaching kids to play hard the whole time, that is a challenge. And getting the kids to put their teammates ahead of them today, it's a challenge. 'Cause everybody's telling them how good you are, Mark. It's just your year. You're a senior. Your agent, your shoe agent, your mom, your dad, your girlfriend, your grandparents. Everybody telling you how good you are. And here I am, the coach, telling them, hey, Mark, you got to put your teammates ahead of them. So sometimes, but you got to be yourself as a coach. I tell the kids, we keep tissues behind the bench. And I tell them, if it ever gets too intense, you look behind the bench, hey, take some tissues, go out in the hallway, freshen up a little bit, come back, no penalty. No penalty at all. And the kids, they know. I said, sorry, fellas, I can't play tonight. I would rather play. When people say, when you go to a Maryland game, do I want to be Mark Turgeon? No. I wanted to be Mello Trimble. I still want to play at that level. So my coaching, I'm a coach that loves to play. And Mark, when I'm open, I wanted the ball. I'm a basketball snob. Just beer snobs, that only drink, IPA, Darkness 90. When I played basketball, I only invited the guys that I wanted to play with. My rec league team was together for 20 years. We could play to win. So, you know what? My passion sometimes, sometimes I'm a little too emotional, but you know what? My players understand that. My wife doesn't always. Maybe some of the fans don't. But my players know that, hey, their coach is passionate.
Give me the Aau Magruder team since you've been here. And if you need to make 2 or 3 of them, you can do that too.
Aau Magruder team?
Aau Magruder team. If you could field 1 or 2 teams to go out there.
Well, I've been here a long time, Mark. J.J. Epps is just a tremendous point guard.
He's at year 1?
He's my point guard. And I've had some really good point guards. He was very good. Silas Chung, my AD, played at Mount St. Mary's. Played overseas for a couple of years. Silas would be in there. I'm trying to start when I've been in my career. Jerome wouldn't be. He'd be on a third team. maybe honorable mention. But he turned out in the NBA to be the best.
Yeah.
But in high school, he's honorable mention. Benji Serpin. He's probably my second best point guard. Played at University of Maryland Eastern Shore. Played at my All-American junior college player. Graduated in '95. Pele and Isaiah Swan from my state championship team too. Pele played at Coastal Carolina, played overseas for 8 years, Big South Player of the Year, stud athlete, great player. Got cut in 9th grade.
Really?
Cut in 9th grade, played JV in 10th grade, became a college All-American as senior.
Wow.
That's what we get, sometimes.
Yeah.
And Isaiah Swan played at Florida State. Just a tremendous high school player. He's still playing at 32, 33 years old, playing in Argentina. Went to his wedding a couple of years ago. Great kid. Nick and Garland would probably be like second team guys right there. Donald Robinson played at junior college with Deontay Twyman down at Polk Community College. He played at West Virginia Tech. He's been overseas now for a few years. Brandon Giles is a great point guard for him. He played at Longwood. Now recently Brian Bollert and Joe Hoogley.
Yeah.
So I've been for a public school. We've probably had about 10 guys that played Division I, which is pretty special. I've been blessed. The people saying why you stay at Magruder so long. Well, you know what? We've had a lot of good players. We've had a lot of good players.
Talk to me about this upcoming season. Practice starts in, 2-3 weeks?
Yeah, 20 days. Yeah, we start November 15th. Looking forward to it. Got 7 seniors. They're all, nice kids who are all pretty good players. None of them are great. I got some good younger players. We're probably going to go back to playing 10 or 11 people, which I generally don't like doing.
You're in the 3A still, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But if we're all healthy and stuff, we might be pressing more than we've pressed recently, and maybe with the 35-second shot clock, and team chemistry is so important. And right now, my best teams generally have that 7-8 man rotation, which I like.
Yeah.
But we could have, right now, we could have 10 or 11 guys in the rotation, and if we do that, we will definitely press more and run more. But they're really good kids. We're going to have good balance, and it's going to be I don't know, Springbrook's going to be very talented in Paint Branch, but I like our kids, and hopefully we're going to, hopefully be better in February, but we've been really working hard with the conditioning.
Is that next Magruder star somewhere in the pipeline? Is there someone that, maybe a younger kid who comes to your camp that has the potential to be that
Well, we got a
next
few
guy?
younger kids, but you know what? That's the beauty of basketball, and Mark. I've had kids sometime average double figures on JV, and then they score 10 points in their varsity career.
Yeah.
And there's other kids just like Markel Fultz. He played freshman in JV at the Maggot. Fultz was in our gym a couple years ago playing, and now he's playing for the Sixers, first pick of the draft. So I don't want to put any expectations on kids, because sometimes, I thought Nick Griffin would be good because he's such a good kid and had a work ethic. But you know what? Yeah, Jerome Williams. If you'd have told me in high school he's gonna, be a pro fraternity, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Pele got cut in 9th grade. It's like so. So I don't know. I think we got a lot of kids that are excited about basketball, and that's all we can do. When I first got my first head coaching job, and still to this day, what's your number one thing you want to do is get the kids excited about basketball. Get them excited about basketball, because then it takes too much time to be good nowadays. Everybody in the world's got a trainer. There's 8 million camps. There's 8 million things out there. Colleges are so expensive now. When I got my scholarship to BU, it was unbelievable. It was $8,000. And now, like, my old school costs like $65,000.
Crazy.
So, to be it's a big country. To be good at anything, you gotta have a passion for it, and you truly gotta love it. You truly gotta love it. So, I try to get our kids to love basketball more.
All right, Coach. Well, that about wraps it up. The last thing I want to do, I want to ask you a question that I've asked every coach throughout this series. I'm curious to see your answer. And your name has come up a couple times throughout this question. If there was a pickup basketball game today with all of the coaches in the DMV, who would your first pick be?
Jeez. Well, this present day, I'll take my staff against any staff. I got Brian Maggot, the best shooter around. Even though he's 60 years old, he's like me. We both need new knees. I can't play anymore, but I still can shoot. So put me and Brian on the wings. Then I got Hendrick Palmer, my assistant coach, who played at Marymount. Hendrick's only 32, 33. Got some of the best moves I've ever done. Tony Giles, he can be the backup point guard. Tony's 61, pride of Central High School, PG County.
Yeah.
Gives us that PG County toughness.
Yeah.
That he's got that swagger. Tony be back up there, point guard. My son Tim, great shooter at Salisbury, all-time leading field goal, 3-point percentage, top 10 in the nation, high school. Kenny Lincoln's been with me 21 years, pride of Richard Montgomery High School, tough Lincoln Park neighborhood. Kenny sets great screens, gets great screens, so hey, I like my staff, we got it, and that's one thing I'm so proud of my program. Kenny's been with me 21 years. Tony's been with me 20 years. Hendrick's been with me 6 or 7 now. It's just, it's awesome. Those guys are just better than me. They're better. And anytime in business and life, my family's better than me. I'm good at certain things, but when you can surround yourself with people that are better than you, it just makes it so much better. So, you know what? Playing basketball, I still remember it. It's just a joy. And sometimes, and it's good you ask that, because sometimes coaches forget what it's like to make a basket. We're just worried about the final score sometime during a game. But when you're out there, and I've seen this at camp over the years, when kids make a basket, sometimes they run down that court, they just have a little more bounce in their step. They could be losing by 30 or could be up by 30. That's still a great feeling to make a basket, and basketball is so much fun. It's so much fun if it's fun the right way. So I think sometimes coaches, don't forget what it was like, whether you played in grade school or high school. It's a fun game. It's a fun game.
All right, Coach. Well, again, we appreciate it. It's been great talking to you. Just talking Montgomery County basketball. You're a very passionate coach who I have a lot of respect for, and we look forward to seeing what you have this year.
All right, thanks, Mark. Keep up the good work.